Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's Romit and Partha. We're talking about the recent HHS Safe Harbor proposed rule that proposes to remove the safe harbor protections for Part D and managed Medicaid rebates, as well as introduce a new safe harbor for patient point of sale discounts and for admin fees with PBMs, very briefly put. We're going to talk about some thoughts, some considerations to consider when you're evaluating the impact of this proposed rule in your organization, some things to think about anticipating what the final rule may have. Briefly about Akara first. For those who don't know us, we're a consulting and technology provider. We offer expertise in forecasting and gross to net in government pricing, contract ops, and product launches in mergers and acquisitions. We also have a technology platform called Simply, which is a forecasting and analytics platform. And relevant to this, we've been using the platform to model the potential impacts of new Part D and managed Medicaid contracts out of Genome at a fixed price value, which we know is floating around from some of the big payers today. So we've been looking at, if you change to this model, what does that mean for your liabilities and for gross to net management? What we will talk about today are rumors and whispers related to the safe harbor proposed rule. What are folks talking about at manufacturers and industry? We've had the opportunity to talk to some of the very smart lawyers in our space to hear what they're concerned about. And based on all of these whispers we've been hearing, we have some thoughts of our own on not just operationalization and some ideas to consider, but also what does this conceptually mean for how you work with your Part D partners, your managed Medicaid partners in your contract negotiations. What we won't cover is the background of what this proposed rule is and any legal interpretations. We're certainly not qualified to do so from a legal perspective. Definitely talk to your internal and external counsel, your government affairs folks, to learn more about the legal implications and what's going on with kind of the rule as the final rule approaches. Some housekeeping. Number one, there's a lot we don't know. We thought this is in some ways a fun exercise to talk about, hey, what's really what matters here, what's relevant based on our expertise in the space and working with contracts, working with government pricing. So a lot of what we talk about might be wrong, and that's okay. Maybe one or two things will be right, in which case we'll be like, awesome, that's great. But most importantly, it's food for thought to spark dialogue and maybe something that you can take back in your organization for consideration. We're not going to cover everything. We'll cover some things that we think are particularly relevant, interesting, and that we're qualified to talk about. And if you have any questions on anything we discuss here, definitely email us. And also importantly, April 8th, comments to HHS and the proposed rule are due. If there's anything that you would like to submit that you can't do so through your own organization, we're happy to do so under our banner in the comments we'll be submitting. You can either submit the comments anonymously through our blog page, or you can email us at insights@akaragroup.com, and we'll happily blind those and submit them along with some of the thoughts that we'll be passing along to HHS. As many have mentioned, they've received almost 20,000 comments so far, so there's a lot for them to read through. Who knows what that will mean for when the final rule gets effectuated. So I'll move it on to Partha now.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to summarize. We've been spending a lot of time speaking with a lot of different manufacturers, lobbyist groups, attorneys, and trying to summarize what we've been hearing and what they've been saying into just this one-stop shop. What we've been hearing is that a couple of things. Number one, manufacturers have been asking for the rebate to be passed through to the beneficiary for the longest time, and ensuring that rebate is benefiting the patient. So what we're hearing is that any pushback by the pharma industry or any pushback by anybody because of implementation concerns is sort of being put to the side, because we're achieving something that we've been asking for a long time. Number two, what we do know is that what is in the final rule is not what has been proposed. There will be some changes, and there's going to be some significant changes as a result of the comments and so forth. Three, we think that most people think that a full 2020 implementation is unlikely. However, there has been a lot of discussion on doing a phased approach. So we'll have some implementation model effective 1/1/2020, and that may evolve in 2021, 2022, and so forth. There's been a lot of conversation regarding how this is going to impact commercial. I've been on several calls where people are very convinced that, saying frankly, hyperbolically, all rebates are going away and that we're moving to a new paradigm, both in Part D, managed Medicaid, and who knows when this is going to spill over into commercial. Roman and I have actually debated this, if that's true, and we're not so sure if it does spill over into commercial. If you think about it, and we just picked a couple of analogs, Medicare Part D, when it was created back in 2003, I think, right? Back in 2003 was, modeled after the commercial market. If you look at the final rule or or changes in Medicaid, Medicaid was frankly very late to the party in order to change their reimbursement model from either a usual and customary negotiated rate or to a negotiated rate using the NADAC model or the average acquisition cost model from the previous AWP or WAC plus, AWP or minus or WAC plus. So I'm not 100% sure if commercial does all of a sudden adopt this new contracting approach. Okay, let me move over to, based off of all of these conversations, here's what we believe. And I think I'd start off by saying one thing that we definitely believe is something will be happening by 2020. There is not necessarily a conversation from our network saying that, oh, this might get struck down, this proposed rule has no legs, it'll go nowhere. Everybody we have spoken to 100% believes something will be happening. That's one. Two, we believe that it is very likely that one of the things in the proposed rule is moving away from a WAC-based percent sort of rebate mechanism to a set pricing, or what is effectively a GNUP-based pricing model. In fact, the market is already embracing this, where we have heard a number of the key payers in Medicare Part D for their 2020 bids that they're expecting a set price or a GNUP-based contract in exchange for formulary positions. So we feel very confidently that not only will something be happening, but the payers are also expecting something to be happening. And they're already accounting for that in their 2020 bids. The third point I'd bring up is that it's very likely that the phase one approach to this will be a pay and chase model, where basically manufacturers are going to be putting money into the hands of some switch or a third-party administrator. Could be an existing third-party administrator, it could be a PBM, it depends. But basically that money then will be used in order to create that subsidy for the patient, where the patient gets a point of sale discount. And then there'll be some reimbursement or reconciliation, rather, some reconciliation between the manufacturer and that switch or third-party administrator, that TPA. So effectively, it becomes a pay and chase model. I'll give you a pot of money, you give it to my customer, and then you show me the records, and then we'll figure out if what's out there is what should have been paid. We definitely have heard that if the PBMs are going to be acting as that switch or that TPA, that they'll be looking to use their admin fee lever or play with their admin fees to account for that float in the discount or float in money that they have to incur rather. So we think that the admin fees are very likely to change with these PBMs. And the final thing is, what we strongly believe is that there are a number of open policy questions that not only does HHS or the OIG have to answer, but also CMS, because we know that there's some impacts here on government pricing and so forth.
And one thing to your earlier point about commercial spillover, the admin fees could be a lever there. If on the commercial side of these payers, if they see in Part D that the new safe harbor protection for admin fees with fixed admin fees are financially beneficial, they'll say, well, why don't we try this out? Because it might be more fruitful for them on that side. So that could be one impact to spillover happening sooner than later.
It all depends on how much the commercial rebate is being kept and what's the offset with the admin fee, right? On that book of business. So that's a good point. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this is kind of, big swings on our part, but we believe that really HHS or the OIG is fundamentally misunderstanding this relationship between manufacturers and payers, that they have, frankly, and it's kind of demonstrated in the preamble of the proposed rule, a surface level understanding of how our relationship with PBMs are, especially in the Part D space. We say this for a couple different reasons. Number one, in the proposal, as we understood it, as I mentioned earlier, HHS is proposing to eliminate this WAC-based rebate and set up and move towards a set price or a GNUP-based discount model. And really, the preamble discusses about how this is used in a way in which to moderate what our WAC increases have been in the past. Let's not even get into the conversation of what the gross to net bubble is and if WAC has been egregiously abused the way that the preamble sort of discusses. But our belief is that rather than, if they're moving to this GNUP-based model, rather than even address or create a new discount mechanism such as GNUP, I think, HHS has failed to realize that almost universally of all of our payer contracts, that price protection clauses have served as a function in order to prohibit such egregious WAC increases as HHS has suggested. I'm sure all of you are aware of either cumulative or non-cumulative WAC or net-based price protection clauses that exist with all of your payers. So we believe rather than HHS proposing something new, a GNUP-based pricing, why not just leverage the existing terms and conditions that are out there? Sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or at least use what's available already that the commercial marketplace has already come up with. The second thing that we believe that the second reason why we believe HHS is fundamentally or has a surface level view of the marketplace is because what we had understood and what we distilled from the proposed rule was that there was some discussion about eliminating formulary restrictions. Now, I will say that there's some ambiguity here. We've spoken with some attorneys who say, yeah, they said that in paragraph 1, but if you go down to paragraph 3, then they seem to reverse that position. So sort of classic misunderstanding from a government standpoint. Now, if we believe, if our understanding is that they are eliminating formulary restrictions, we think this is a tremendous market change because effectively what we're doing is we're creating open formularies or open copay programs where basically there's no utilization management being done by the payer. I think the bigger problem is really that we think that HHS doesn't understand why manufacturers engaged in rebates with payers in the first place. If we go back to our history books, we remember that really the reason why we were offering these rebates was in order to help inform the P&T committee at these PBMs in order to understand and have economics as well as medication efficacy, therapeutic efficacy, determine how they were going to be constructing their formularies. So the concept of a rebate was less about the pass-through to the patient directly and had more to do with P&T economics. So, by saying that we're going to remove these restrictions, we think that, again, HHS may not fully understand what the formulary is for and why we pay rebates for these formulary access. The third thing is what we picked up on is that HHS started to propose a completely different model, a chargeback model, which, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. When I hear the word chargeback, immediately my mind goes to the wholesaler, and then you have your EDI records and then reconciliation and all of that. We think that, frankly, HHS may not understand the real business and how chargebacks work. We think that there are existing paradigms that can be used. One, and manufacturers can know these types of programs intimately, a copay card program. We'll get into more detail on this in a minute, or possibly using the Medicare Part D coverage gap constructs. We currently use Palmetto, the TPA, in order to administer point of sale discounts, in fact, when a beneficiary is in the donut hole. So that's an option. What we do believe, however, is that, again, from our ear to the ground, that likely a pay and chase model will be coming up. All right, so let's dive into the implementation models and why we say that they're existing paradigms, or at least something better than what a chargeback model is. As I mentioned, there's option 1, a copay card. Option 2 is using the Medicare coverage gap rebate mechanism. Option 3, a pay and chase model. Option 1, I think we're all very familiar. On the commercial book of business, manufacturers for a while now have been offering copay cards where I, as a commercial beneficiary, depending on my health condition and perhaps my asset state and all of that, can apply through for a manufacturer to subsidize my out-of-pocket costs so I can continue on therapy, which we think is a fantastic program and has been around for a while. Obviously, we think, so what we believe is why not remove the kickback statute provision where manufacturers can now offer those copay card programs to Medicare Part D beneficiaries as well as managed Medicaid beneficiaries. That would be amazing. So now manufacturers can leverage the existing infrastructure that they already have, maybe with some tweaks, but the existing infrastructure, and they can actually help that patient, that Medicare Part D patient, ease their financial burden. We do believe, however, that HHS and OIG needs to address these payer copay accumulators, which have been frankly adversely impacting the commercial beneficiaries and what their out-of-pocket spend is. And that's a conversation for another time about copay accumulators. There's some counter arguments to this. One is that this can adversely impact manufacturers' gross to net. So, for example, your liabilities right now would be your Part D rebates plus your coverage gap plus perhaps this new Part D copay. So that could hurt you from a financial standpoint, although Romit earlier made a good argument saying that might actually help patients, though, and really that's the business that we're into. The other thing, and I'm just not a lawyer and I don't know, is this something OIG can do or does this take an act of Congress? I just don't know the legal ins and outs there. The second option that we propose is using some sort of evolved Medicare Part D coverage gap program that we use. So as you guys are probably aware, right now what happens is that on a quarterly basis, patients walk in. Once a patient hits their deductible, they walk in or passes through their deductible and all their out-of-pocket costs, they enter into the donut hole. And what is happening now is that they're receiving an immediate 70% subsidy, which is being funded by manufacturers. The way that the operations of that occur is that that funding is done by Palmetto. Palmetto then submits a claim up to the manufacturer, who then reimburses Palmetto, and sort of that whole Medicare coverage gap process. So right now, Palmetto as a TPA is enabling these point of sale discounts and effectively manufacturer rebates. We think, why not open up their capabilities in order to do something similar? Of course, there would have to be some nuances there, such as a TPA may need to know some of the contract terms and conditions and so forth. And we also believe that the data detail needs to be far greater than what it is today. If anybody who plays with data knows, the coverage gap data is far less robust than the PBM claim level data that we receive in NCPDP format today. So there's some tweaks there that would need to happen in order to make this work. But again, it's an existing infrastructure, so why not take advantage of that? Open questions. How do we know that the discounts are being passed down to the patient directly? And how do we audit that and validate that so we make sure that our money is being spent correctly? And also, once again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if the OIG or this takes congressional authority. The thing that we've been hearing, the most common approach that will happen is is option 3 in a phased approach, which is a pay and chase model. Effectively, manufacturers are going to put money in some sort of a switch or a TPA, and they're going to make that estimate of what that amount is going to be. That amount then will be used to create that patient point of sale subsidy, and then the switch or TPA will end up submitting something back to a manufacturer, and then there'll be a reconciliation. So as we've said, so if I give $100 and they pay out presumably $100 in patient point of sale, that might all work. But now I have to reconcile with my switch. Did all of those discounts indeed go to the patients? How do we know that there's no leftover monies or something like that? We think that this introduces a significant amount of risk to manufacturers by way of disputes. As anybody who's in operations or even in finance knows, that many times manufacturers have significant disputes with some of the larger PBMs. Not just because of the proverbial duplicate scripts and all of that, but also because of data aggregators, incorrect data, and so forth. We also think this is a brand new paradigm. We're not quite sure why HHS wants to do something brand new, but it's a new paradigm. And like anything, there'll be a lot of bumps in the road on initial rollout is what we would anticipate. We do suspect, though, that there's going to be significant admin fee or service fee charges by this switch for that float on money. If it is a PBM who acts as a switch, our suspicion is that for that float of the money, they're going to be increasing with their administrative fee. Back to what Roman said a little bit earlier. If formulary restrictions are not permitted, again, our question that we had posited earlier, do manufacturers even want to participate in this model, especially given all the contract operations issues, right? And if there's significant disputes that are outstanding. So again, these are just some ideas on how implementation models work that we think are better than you thinking about a chargeback model. Okay, so we have a boatload of significant open questions, as I'm sure all of you do, and this is just a summary of some of these. In fact, I've been on a crusade talking about this with a lot of different folks about why didn't we just go ahead and change the Medicare coverage gap program to be able to call it the Medicare Part D program, right? And drop the coverage gap. And what I meant by that was if we were to drop the floor of a beneficiary's out-of-pocket spend before they hit the donut hole from $13.70 to $0, tie in the Part D negotiated rebates that we have, as well as changing that mandated 70% rebate to some negotiated rebate, we would effectively be achieving a pure pass-through program to Medicare Part D patients. And working in a lab in an isolated system, that sounds great, and I probably could make the numbers work and it would make sense. There are significant counter-arguments, though, that in speaking with some very smart attorneys. Number one, again, they said it would take an act of Congress because of the way that the legislation works for Part D. Okay, that's a legitimate point. The other thing was that they brought up was a non-interference clause, which is part of the Part D program. And again, not as a lawyer, but from my understanding, where the government was explicitly prohibited from getting involved in manufacturer relationships, meaning contracts and rebates and stuff with PBMs. So that would have that would put a kibosh, I guess, in terms of changing the Medicare coverage gap program to be a Medicare Part D rebate program. It was an open question, an idea. The second question that we really have is, how does this patient point of sale apply to Troop when it comes to the Medicare Part D coverage gap eligibility? So will these rebates be something that are part of their out-of-pocket costs and then therefore moves them through the donut hole faster, or does it not count and it moves them through the donut hole slower? So before they get into the CAT coverage, it's just, I'm hopeful that somebody will be opining on this and pushing something out. The other thing, open question that we still have is there going to be a prohibition on Part D contract formulary conditions, and even to a degree, I guess, managed Medicaid plans, contracts that exist? And then the final one is we would expect in the final rule and some instruction, I don't know how this works out, but for HHS to tell CMS, as well as the VA, that we need a lot of clarity when it comes to government pricing. So if this were to spill over into commercial, what's this mean for best price calculations? How do we ensure that Part D beneficiaries are receiving the discount and not a commercial beneficiary? I think you had a managed Medicaid point too, right?
Yeah, and well, we know right now that negotiated managed Medicaid rebates are not excluded from best price based on the statute. So right now, if you have a managed Medicaid rebate that sets best price, and now you have a point of sale discount with the patient, how do you handle that? Where do you recognize the discount? Is it your financial transaction with the payer, the pharmacy, if it goes on to the patient? And how do the existing regs and reasonable assumptions we have apply? So those are some of the areas where I'm sure there will be a lot of thinking and discussion should this thing get finalized and start affecting real life.
So that's pretty much it, folks. We, again, wanted to say there's a lot that we don't know. There are some things that we may have gotten wrong, but what we wanted to do is provide you a little food for thought. If you couldn't tell by now, we are geeks and love this type of stuff. So if you have any questions or comments or just want to have dialogue, feel free to drop either Roman or I a note. We'd be happy to hop on the phone or whatever, just because this is interesting stuff to us. Once again, if you have any comments or questions that you guys cannot submit through your organization, you can either we can submit them on your behalf. We're not really a bureaucratic organization where we're okay with submitting questions and having HHS or the OIG opine on them. The reminder, April 8th. So if you have anything, email us at insights@Akara Group. You can go to our website on our blogs page. Again, we're going to blind anything that we receive so that way you don't have to be concerned. So with that, I think we're good. Thank you for the time. So apologies in advance, or rather, apologies for speaking so fast. There's just a lot of content to cover. And if you want to talk further, drop us a note. Thank you.